Okay, now we'll just have a little look at a basic two-way ANOVA for a between subjects design. I'll do the between subjects one because the within subjects one is just a matter of adding another factor to that last analysis. We could do more. We can look at between by within and 2x3s and 7x6s, but at a certain point, we're just adding variables and that doesn't sort of change the point and click. It just means adding another thing when you're doing it. So I'm mindful that I don't want to kind of waste too much time making a million videos, especially because there's a lot of this stuff already out there. But just quickly, so to do a two-way, you can see now we've got the same setup as before, have a DV and some details over here. But now we have two IVs, one for diagnosis and one for treatment. And I think from memory we were talking about OCD and GAD and something like CBT and fluoxetine as our different options, right? We drop into the GLM model again. I'll just reset everything. To organize for a two-way is very straightforward. You simply pop your DV in the DV, and then rather than just adding one IV to the fixed factor, now you're going to go ahead and add two. Oh, what? If you want to do a three-way, you could add something else and make it a three-way. It's really not rocket sciencey stuff to start with, right? From our options, we tick off the same things we always do. We want power and effect size. We want our descriptive stats. We want that Levene's test. The only really key difference here now is that from the estimated marginal means, whereas before we just had one IV, so we only had one effect to compare, now we have two IVs. So that means that we have the unique effects from each of these IVs on their own. Then we have the interaction of those two things. And so we need to sort of explore them all. And we do the usual stuff and we say, okay, compare main effects for these three things. Please let me know what's going to happen kind of thing. Now I'm going to hit paste and I'll bring that syntax up. Oops, that's the recording. And here it is here. So we'll run this and you'll see, in fact, if you look at the top, it's basically identical. We're just adding an extra estimated marginal means table. So now for treatment, diagnosis, and the interaction. Okay. Now we go ahead and run that. And you'll find that we get the same kind of data we had previously. We're just going to get twice as much of it. So rather than just having treatment or just diagnosis, right, now we have both. And so we have cells. So we can have how many people with GAD were taking fluoxetine, how many of those folk with OCD were taking fluoxetine, and so on and so forth for CBT. And we break those numbers down from 20, 20, 20, 20 to 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10 kind of thing. And we get up our full numbers, right? Same as before, we have a quick review of our descriptors in case there's anything unusual, missing cases, numbers that don't add up, like a score of 1,000. And then we just drop down to Levene's quality test first, and we say, okay, is it the same or different? So looking at the DV based on the mean, non-significant, non-significant, they're all non-significant. Okay, great. So here we're saying the error variance across these four conditions of four cells is roughly all the same, and thus we can proceed with ANOVA. Now, then we look at our tested between subjects. Same deal as before. We're just looking at the F and the significance. And we've got our effect size and our power for later, but right now we just need F and significance. Have a look at treatment and diagnosis. These are the main effects of those two IVs. So here, there's no significant difference. Okay, in other words, whether you get fluoxetine or whether you get CBT, the effect on the anxiety scores is the same between the two. Likewise, whether you're diagnosed with OCD or with GAD, the effect of that diagnosis on anxiety is about the same. However, when we look at the interaction effect, there's something going on here. So this one is significant, and you can see the F value is much greater than these two. So that means that while neither of the main effects are relevant for our understanding of anxiety, there is some kind of interaction going on between CBT and fluoxetine and GAD and OCD. Now, we'll have a little look in a sec. If either of these two are significant, we could look down here at the breakdown of pairwise for each of them. So for treatment first to compare the two treatments, or for diagnosis to compare the two diagnoses to see if there are any differences between them there. We wouldn't worry here because these are all the same, but that's how you would do it for the future. However, what we don't have is a breakdown of the interaction. So we can see the means, but we don't have any estimated marginal means in terms of significance and that kind of thing, which is a problem because we can't then decide whether or not there are significant differences or not. So we have to do a little bit of syntaxy stuff to decompose this interaction. And I'll show you how to do that. It's not super difficult. Don't panic. Okay, so with that in mind, right, we know we have to break this down. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back to our syntax, and we need to conduct what's called a simple effects analysis. Now, it's not crazy stuff. Don't freak out at this stage and be like, oh my gosh, syntax, scary. It really isn't. All we're saying is that we want to get the pairwise comparisons for this particular thing, right? But because we have a 2x2, we have to kind of tell SPSS in what way we'd like that to occur. So what I mean, right, have a look at this, where it says estimated marginal means, give me the tables for treatment by diagnosis. If I wanted to know the pairwise, all I have to add here, I just copy and paste this section for the comparisons and the adjustment for Shidak, right? And I say compare that in terms of one of these IVs. So either treatment or diagnosis. So just for the sake of demonstration, if you like, I'll show you both. So we can put them in here as both treatment and diagnosis, right? And what it will do, if I was to run this now in the same design, hang on, what's time doing in there? That doesn't belong there. Sorry. With the same design, that should spit out all of what we had before, right? Why is it not spitting anything out? What's happened? Oh, maybe I need the time thing. Sorry. I don't think we did. I don't think we need time. I've mucked something up there. Yeah, no, I've screwed up something. Hang on a moment. Yeah, I had in fact actually screwed something. I must have copied and pasted it in carefully. Sorry, I deleted the active dataset thing, so I didn't know what dataset it was referring to. But we should have the same deal as before. Here was our one way up here. All we've done is we've extended now to 2. What I'm saying is if you add these 2 lines, it will give you the pairwise comparison for both of these. So if I go ahead and run this now, right, you'll see we get all the same information as before, between subjects, etc. Just if I come right down, now I'll get a breakdown of treatment by diagnosis. In this instance, we're doing it from the perspective of comparing the diagnosis as the primary thing and then looking at the 2 treatments. But you could flip that theoretically and compare the 2 treatments by virtue of the 2 diagnoses. Now, I'm going to go back to the syntax for a second, and the reason I mention this is that it doesn't really make sense to do both. You can do both, you can, as you see just here, but you're increasing the risk of type 1 error whenever you have more observations than you need to. And you'll find that while the differences are, while the statistics change a little bit in terms of number, the narrative doesn't. And the important part is that it only kind of makes theoretical sense sometimes to run these one way. So what I mean is, right, if we went back up and said, okay, we want to run this simple effects by one of these 2, can you change your treatment? Well, yes, you can. So if I'm diagnosed with OCD and I discover that it's better to have fluoxetine than CBT, well, I can change that treatment. Can I change my diagnosis? Well, no, I can't. So it's not like I'd be going, well, I'm taking fluoxetine anyway, I better just go and swap from OCD to GAD, right? That makes no sense at all. So we wouldn't do both of these. We would just do this for treatment, because that's the only one that we could actually affect as an IV, in therapy. So we'd say, okay, let's do treatment and diagnosis on their own as main effects, and then let's please have the interaction as a simple effects analysis for levels of treatment, because we can't change diagnosis, but we can change what treatment you're taking. So if we discover there's an interaction between diagnosis and treatment, then we can at least inform people with a particular diagnosis of which particular treatment they should go and get. So if I run that now and I minimize all this stuff away out of here and just have a look at this last one, we'll see again, we're saying, okay, there's nothing happening for either of these on their own, but there is an interaction. And if we scroll down to that, we can break that down in terms of, okay, which diagnoses do you have, and then which treatments should you take? So what we're saying is that if you have GAD, there is a significant difference between fluoxetine and CBT. And similarly for OCD, there is also a significant difference between these 2. Okay. The important part though is that the difference between fluoxetine and CBT is positive for GAD and it's negative for OCD. Now we said anxiety scores earlier, and we're kind of working on that assumption that anxiety being higher means worse. So if we minus fluoxetine from CBT and get a positive number, It means that fluoxetine had a less greater effect on anxiety. In other words, there were higher anxiety scores for the fluoxetine group than there were for the CBT group. And we can see that up here in the means here. See 14.5 and 8 versus 5 and 14. So what we're really kind of saying is that if you have GAD, the treatment of choice for you is actually CBT, because that will bring your anxiety scores down as low as possible. Yeah. But if you have OCD, for you, the treatment of choice is fluoxetine, because that will bring down your scores as low as possible. So in this instance, it doesn't really make sense to try and talk about it the other way around. We wouldn't say, oh, by the way, if you were taking fluoxetine, you should try and develop an OCD, right? That doesn't work. But we can use this to inform what types of treatments people with particular disorders should seek out. And so that's it. That's really all you need to know in terms of a 2x2. It's a pretty simple way of doing it. You can break it down. Obviously, it becomes more complicated with 2x3, 3x4, 5x6, etc. But just for the sake of this unit, for researching, after refreshing our research literacy, this is as far as we need to go. I mentioned in the lecture about planned comparisons. You would use those when we had more complicated stuff and we have to kind of pick and choose. But the important part here is that, you know, there's a logic and a reason to why this was done in the way it was. And when you're reading a journal article, you're trying to see whether or not that logic and reasoning has been put in place and whether or not the decisions the authors have made are justified. And if they are, then, you know, you can proceed with more confidence and reliability in the results than if they really aren't.